Secretary of Home Affairs. And finally, from the ESG perspective, we have with us Mr. Upendra Parkhi, who's the head of ESG at Legacy. And he was previously also the head of environment with Tata Steel. He comes with over 35 years of experience in the ESG sector, especially relating to iron and steel mining, power industries, so on and so forth. So I'll keep the introduction short and let's begin. I'll start by sharing the screen and over to you. Over to you all.
Thank you very much, Ashni. Welcome and very good evening. We're going to just do the quick highlights in terms of what some of the areas will kind of probably look at being bothersome, probably look at being an ease of doing business, ease of living together. From the point of view of compliance professional, from the point of view of governance, compliance, risk and ethics, what is it that is in the angle? Over to you, Jyoti, to take us through next 30 minutes.
So from the GRACE perspective, we have tried to capture what are the compliance and the perspective, the incentives or the announcement that have been made. Some of the critical announcements that were made today include the ease of doing business in terms of reduction of number of compliances and repeal of around 1,000+ laws has been announced. There is a shift to data-driven compliance regime, which is including digitization of manual processes and interventions that have been taken up, like integration of portals and at the state and the central level to make sure that the compliance reporting is eased, considering the time and the human resources efforts that are required in terms of reporting of compliances. So would request the panelists their views on these in these announcements that have been made, and if any comments that you would like to make.
So I'm just going to kind of request Apurva for his view. Apurva, for the first time, probably we see a statement of intent here to say that there will be interventions undertaken to make sure that the data would be available. It's from the point of view of ease of doing business and ease of living put together. How do you read this? In a sense, it just says that there will be interventions on the digitization. So manual will get replaced with digitization. What's your view and what's your take?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I think, Suhas, you sort of hit the nail on the head by saying that, the word being used, I mean, at the moment, it is just sort of open to, if I may use a legal term, interpretation, because we really don't know what sort of intervention and what sort of digitization will be going through. The Honorable Finance Minister did sort of indicate certain aspects, in terms of trying to sort of make the land records digitized and other sort of compliance records digitized. To my mind, I didn't see any time frame. At least I don't know that I missed it in terms of how this digitization process will be done. But it's a positive step. I think the fact is what the last 2 years have at least taught us is that we do need as much digitization as possible. We are still a way, as a country, way behind in that. There are a lot of while positive steps have been taken in the last few years in terms of trying to convert a lot of compliances with various regulations and legislations in terms of digital through digital processes. Maintenance of records across this entire country is going to take a humongous effort. But this is a first step. It's a positive step. We need to, sort of understand what exactly the exact implications of these statements are, what exactly are the steps that are going to be taken. But it couldn't have come any sooner. It's a positive step in that respect.
Thank you very much, Apurva. I'm going to request Mr. Ramesh Sharma. Sir, you dealt with governments and you dealt with the manner in which implementations happen. The statement of intent appears to be suggesting that we will do the ground level assessment and look at how do we involve citizens and businesses through crowdsourcing of suggestions. So that how would this shape up and how would this work?
It's too early to comment on anything because, today, for example, I heard the interview of Amitabh Kant, and he repeatedly said implementation, implementation, and implementation. So yes, the process has been set in motion, and obviously the whole idea is that all the stakeholders should be involved and should be taken along to see that the compliances are in place and crowd funding or sourcing should happen. But coming to compliances, I think out of 25,000 compliances, only 1486 union laws were repealed. I wouldn't say it is a drop in ocean, but yet at the same time, it is not enough. It is not enough. Maybe we could have done much more by now. And at the same time, the issue remains is it's not only union laws, but also the state laws and the municipal laws and the panchayat laws that have to be taken into account. The digitization on which the budget has repeatedly shown the path, that the growth lies in digitization is a very welcome move. And I think digitization in terms of compliances also is very, very positive step. Because I remember as DG Economic Offences Wing, when we used to investigate any case of fraud or corruption or bribery, there were thousands and thousands of records that one had to go through in hard copies. Now with digitization, all that becomes very easy. And especially with the software tools that we have of data mining and data analytics and all that, things become easier, investigation becomes easier. And the process of investigation also gets much more accelerated. So I think, yes, we have to wait and watch and see how it translates into, and I like that word of Amitabh Kant, because the devil lies in implementation. You can lay down any number of policies, guidelines, but implementation is the key word here.
Yes, sir, point very well taken. However, I think the budget is not going to kind of unravel the implementable part of it. It's a statement of intent. It's probably kind of laying down what needs to be done in future for the next financial year for sure. But the third point, which actually...
Sorry, Suhas, it is the government that has to implement whatever the intent is there and whatever the roadmap has been prescribed in the budget. And in that, a very important component is the state. You see, we are only looking at the union level. And union level, there are, as we know, there are 3 lists. So that also would narrow down their activities. It is the state that have to come up to the same levels.
No, sir, what kind of is interesting for me as a compliance professional is that for the first time, probably the government is saying, in this space, we want to get suggestions and do the ground level assessment of what will be impactful. From that perspective, it does seem to suggest that the businesses have a role to play in contributing to the compliance regime. If we were to look at it from this angle to say that, yes, they're saying participation of businesses in developing a data-driven compliance regime is encouraged. And that I read as a clear statement of intent. Of course, what you said rightfully is that, yes, everything will be there at the implementation level. But let's look at a situation and a scenario where we have seen that when one state government implemented a master form to do labor compliances under 14 laws at one go, you see the state governments got themselves aligned, although the implementation of a labor law was a state subject and labor laws are in concurrent list. But 14 states got aligned in matter of months to make sure that there is an ease of compliance across these 14 states. Therefore, at some level, you see the state government and the central government's line is getting thin and thinner by the day. Because if the businesses require this ease of doing business and they require APIs to be opened up, if the APIs are opened up, and that's what I read these statements to mean when we talk about data-driven compliances and the government interventions to pull the data from government system. If one state starts doing it, I think there are 10 states that will follow the suit because that's actually attracting the investments in that particular state.
I totally agree with you, Suhas, because this is a model that is followed in most of the developed countries where the participation of all the key stakeholders are invited. And this is also not, we see in various state governments which are led by relatively younger chief ministers, that nowadays there is a practice which is I'm seeing of late, is that they consider themselves virtually as the CEO of the state. So there is a change in the mindset of the states also, that they, if they have to align themselves, they're not only with the center, but the entire world. I mean, I've seen chief ministers going abroad and trying to get businesses for their states and all that. So yes, this would be a pointer to the states to follow. And I'm sure many of the states would take the lead. And I do hope they take the lead in repealing many of these compliances which are, of the colonial era, which have little less relevance today. And also at the same time, I would also look at, the extreme penalty of, criminality involved in non-compliances that we have discussed often.
Sir, we're not, I mean, I'm just sticking to the budget intent that is coming out here. Which is to say that for ease of doing business today, we are saying that we will improve efficiency of capital and human resources together by making sure that the states get involved into digitization of the manual processes, and there will be interventions undertaken. Now, read that together with to say that integration of central and state level systems will happen through the digital bridges or through automated IT bridges that are being contemplated. I see a total new era emerging here on compliances. Sir, I mean, forget about the criminalization because that's a legislative change that would be required to be taken. But from point of view of opening up APIs and these IT bridges, if we are able to pull the data to create a compliance ecosystem that's data-driven, where the manual interventions get lessened by the day, I think we are looking at a far better data-driven compliance regime. My personal take is, I think,
no doubt you're right, but then I mean, again, sorry for bringing in politics in this. What we are seeing repeatedly now is kind of a confrontationist attitude of states where the governments are different from the center.
Not on this count, sir. I would beg to differ there. If you look at what happened on the labor laws, I think notwithstanding the different political parties controlling the state governments, I think the states got aligned to provide a far better regime on compliance, and I would expect that to happen, notwithstanding the political parties that control the state. Because I think, in my view, this is not an agenda for any political parties. It just is a ease of doing business for better business. Having said that, sir, we can endlessly debate about whether the difference between the state and the center will kind of frustrate the intent here. I firmly believe that this is a beginning, which is kind of a very good beginning.
It's a very good beginning, no doubt.
Yeah, so we kind of, from the point of view of compliance professional today, I think I can expect digitization going through this level where the manual working or manual processes would be replaced with the digital processes. Case in point, again, is the MCA portal 2.0 that we have seen, 3.0 that we are seeing, where the criminalization has been taken a backseat. You can actually pay online fees today through your credit cards and more to kind of make sure that the minor infirmities in the compliances can be taken care. So that's a very, very encouraging kind of a move. And I think even if this begins, the data-driven compliance regime begins today, I think it will be a great step forward. And from that perspective, I think this budget lays down the intent.
In fact, so ask what the budget has done is put into the budget what is exactly actually the situation the world over. So we have to fall in line. So in that sense, the states also would have to fall in line and would have to take into account this digitization and the coordination between the central data and the state data. That should happen, and I'm glad that this innovative step has been taken, has been put into the budget.
Sure, sir. I think just moving on, Jyoti, can we just move to the next point? You see, transition to the circular economy, the more kind of responsible frameworks that are emerging. And I'm going to request Mr. Upendra Parkhi to kind of take us through what these points would mean.
Good evening to all of you. So basically, in transition to circular economy, the government is trying to put up the framework for the extended producers responsibility. So we can take the advantage of it. Then there is also a innovation facilitation for the circular economy. Means basically we don't want to waste anything. So whatever the waste is going, so we can use it, either recycle it, reuse it, or but do not landfill it. Yeah, do not throw away it. So that is the basic circular economy. And for that, they are going to have a public policy. It is a very positive step in that case. And they are going to work in almost 10 sectors, which is on the electronic waste, end of life vehicles, used oil, toxic and hazardous and industrial waste. So these are some of the sectors they will work for.
Sir, Parkhi sir, I just want to kind of ask you one thing. You see, the budget suggests that this will actually enhance the productivity, which I think is a given, because I think circular economy and public policies EPR framework will definitely kind of enhance the productivity. But the second statement linked with that in the budget is that this creates large opportunities for new businesses and jobs.
Yes,
So
absolutely right. Because
help create new jobs.
Yes, sir. So there can be two options. Yeah, there are two options basically. One is the innovation. So how the existing waste you are innovating it for a different usage. So definitely new technologies are coming, new processes are coming, and that is going to result in creating new jobs. Like an example, like a plastic is being used for making fuel. So earlier we used to throw on the ground, but now it is going to be collected, processed. So new technology is coming, and for that even the government is also financing to that, or some subsidies are also being done. So in that case, definitely new jobs will be created.
No, for example, let's take hazardous industrial waste. You see, because hazardous industrial waste is something which we understand that if you actually process it and break it down in terms of chemical molecules and use different technologies, you would be able to look at reducing that waste drastically. Now, I want to say that therefore this process that will be required will generate jobs.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to understand, because
so one simple example I think we can get it is all the medals made in Japan Olympics was from the electronic waste. The waste, say all the metals extracted from the electronic waste. So it is possible, and it can be done.
So therefore, I think if it is, I can understand enhancing productivity, but jobs is something which I was kind of struggling to get. Where is this coming from? But fine, sir. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you. Sir.
Anything else that you would want to suggest in terms of, see, today, if there is a framework for circular economy that's being looked at by EU as the leader in circular economy regulations. Do we actually look at our own frameworks, our own regulations, and our own policies? And how do you do that? Because You see, culturally, circular economy is something which appeals to Indians. Because as it is right from our childhood days, we've been kind of taught to minimize the waste. We've been reusing most of the waste material that we use. It's culturally, it's very proximate to us. From that point of view, therefore, do we need these public policies and regulations to look at EU or create our own, and how would this kind of be looked at?
Sir, I will put it like this: as a individuals or as a Indians, we are recycling or reusing it, but as a corporates, we are not thinking to that line the way we should. And I think that is why these policies and frameworks are required for a common infrastructure, as a common infrastructure for industrial sectors. Definitely also the sharing of information, the sharing of technology, and the support from finance is required. And that is why these frameworks will help us in that direction.
Okay, great, sir. Thank you very much. I think moving ahead, sir, this is something up your alley in terms of environment and what's happening. We just want to understand the Panchamrut that was there in COP26. What
Yes,
is
sir.
it? And
Yeah, I think COP26, it has happened in November, and definitely that India has shown a good direction to the world. We are leading in our renewable energy sourcing, the solar power generation and other areas. Definitely, in some of the developed countries could not meet the target or could not achieve it, but we have done a great job as in India. And I think that is why in this budget, the focus is there on the addressing climate change or even to the ESG issues. It is not formulated in the one part, but if you see in every factor, yeah, it has impacted. You can say about the green bonds. So they are going to address the financing for the new technologies or the climate change and the energy transitions. Same way, if you see the reducing the carbon emission from industry, or particularly from thermal power plant. Now it is being thought of to use biomass as a compulsory from the 5 to 7%. So this will also create a definitely new technologies and new opportunities in a way. Also, you can see that there is a surcharge is proposed from the October for the 2nd October 2022 for an unblended fuel. So there are a lot of technologies being thought of, and the mixing of an fuel, which will biofuel mixing with another fuel is being also worked out, and that to encourage those things, the government is thinking in having surcharge in this line. The
so,
another yes.
Sorry, please go ahead. Please.
Definitely to achieve our targets for the net zero by 2070, 2070 net zero emissions, the boost for the solar power is very important. And that is why, so in this budget, the thrust is given, even the financial allocation is being also made to help the industries, and some concessions are also being given to the manufacturers of the various parts in the solar power systems. Another one important step, which is a very difficult issue to address, how these batteries, particularly in the electrical vehicles, will be changed or these things. So I think a thought is being given so that we will have the common batteries which can be exchangeable like a gas cylinders. So we can use any gas cylinder for in our house in domestic. The similar way we can use the any battery, or we can exchange the battery at a station and get for a new. So in this direction, the action is being thought of, and I think it's a very welcome steps, and it will improve the usage of electrical vehicles. So I think these are some good steps which has been thought. But as you say, the implementation is very important, and how quickly it is being accepted across the India, it is very critical to see, or we should observe about.
Sir, one of the indicators for this implementation is the green clearances. You see, you've been private to kind of, and you have tremendous experience in seeking, obtaining clearances from the government, especially when Parivesh has been there since 2018. And it's a platform through which one kind of seeks consents and clearances, the green clearances, so as it is put up there. So, sir, considering that experience of Parivesh, the objective of centralizing processing center, CPC green, would that or could that be achieved in a short span of time?
Yeah, there short span of time we have to wait to see the actual results, but definitely at least now the visibility is there where we are, and the processes are now transparent in a way. The movement of a file or the clearances one can see sitting at his table. So these are the positive things. But as far as the time is concerned, it depends upon the processes and how the application or how the project has been filed in and with adequate information is there or not. So there are many other factors for delays, including the processes at the government level. So actually a reduction in the time, definitely it's an issue to be thought of or discussed, but visibility, understanding the status, this will be this is there in the government portals, and having all the clearances in one portal, definitely it will be helpful, but implementation as far as time is concerned needs to be seen.
So just staying on here for a minute on this issue is, you see the 4 approvals being clubbed together in one form. All 4 together.
So there are these 4, that clarity, I think we should also need to have that. It is environment clearance, forest clearance, wildlife, and CRZ. So these 4 are even they are going to merge with the state level clearances. So that visibility is not there. But considering the even in this central level, all the 4 clearances, my perception is that it is application is going to be very lengthy, or the information required to fill this application is going to be great.
Okay, sir, thank you very much, because I think that's one clearances, if they get actually clubbed together, whether it is CRZ or whether it is wildlife or forest clearances, all of them getting clubbed together would be a great ease for doing business.
Yes, definitely.
But again, states versus center, other ministries coming in from various other departments such as MSPs. If I think it's
Yeah.
a line, the MSP will come in there and things like that. But notwithstanding that, again, I think it's a great statement. But all 4 getting clubbed together, and if it is transparently available as a movement of your file from Parivesh, I think that will be a great move forward.
Definitely.
Yeah, moving ahead, Jyoti, very quickly. You see, I want to kind of look at and focus on what is this, whether we are moving towards transition to the digital economy, and from that perspective. When we talk about deeds and documents, the budget seems to suggest that you will have today a unified land identification number across India. It also talks about saying that the land records will be available in multiple languages, and you can actually keep on translating them and look at the translated version on the portal itself. So one nation, one document software, one nation, one registry, and therefore one document software is something that is being talked of today. Also, the national generic document registration today, I think most of these registrations are voluntary in nature, that have to be put up there. But if this were to happen, I think again we are talking about transitioning contracts to a very, very different level. So if, let's say, we have a national generic document there with unique land identification number and digital execution of the documents, I think we're moving in an era where we talk about transitioning from paper to the digital. I'm just going to request Mr. Dinesh Pillai for his views. And does this really kind of pose a challenge? Does this become more of a risk rather than a benefit?
So I think this is a very good move from a theoretical point of view. I think it's a very good move. And but how this is going to get implemented, because there is a majority of this is going to be at the state level implementation. And what is this single software going to do rather than capturing the records and putting it on a central repository? I'm not too sure. But going by my experience with working with the other infrastructure, this can actually pose a serious challenge going forward from a risk perspective.
Yeah, that's what I wanted your view on. Does
Yes.
this really increase the risk in the digital space?
This will increase the risk in the digital space. See, I mean, it depends upon what kind of control they put in around this database at this point of time. Now, see, today when you're reading all this, so definitely your PID information is going to be in this, right? You will have your PAN number, you will have your Aadhaar number, and obviously the whatever you are holding. Now, this is a gold mine for anyone who wants to figure out your living style, your wealthiness, and all. And in my experience, breaking into a government system doesn't really take rocket science. So there is a bigger risk, because now it's becoming a risk in the sense of it's a concentration risk, because the entire database is available at one point. And that obviously, I mean, whenever you're going for this kind of a digital enablement, this risk is going to be there in any case, because people are going to, on the other side, are much more capable than you in figuring out how to get this kind of data. But I think it's a, so previously I had to go to maybe 5 states to figure out, what a person possesses. But now today, just getting the Aadhaar card, I can just go to one directly and then pull out whatever data I need. So that's the risk. But I think, see, from a ease point of view or a compliance point of view, I know that, and from a regulatory perspective, I know there is just one area where I need to go and see, and I should get it. It's like, the income tax portal now. So, I mean, there is a risk because everything is there. But I think you don't have any choice. You have to follow. So in that sense, yes, I think.
Yeah, so I think broadly the takeaway seems to suggest that the risk is going to increase, although the benefit, unless you tie in with the states again back into, that doesn't seem to be there at this stage.
If they're actually trying to do, pulling the data from the state level to the central repository, I don't know how good and how efficient it is going to be. Right? Unless you mandatorily ask people to get into the same software and then start putting the data. So, see, the point is how much of the deeds are actually in a digitized form right now. That itself is a big question. And these are all lying in somebody's lockers and all those kind of things. So, from a security and the risk point of view, it's a big risk. From implementation point of view, I don't think too many people will go back and digitize their dates and then put it into the site. Unless government makes a rule that if you want to sell or something, then it has to be there. So we don't know at this point of time. It's a big question mark. I mean, what they want to do and how they're going to achieve. Because see, I mean, I'm aware of those map-grade projects.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened at the end of the day. It started with a bang and there was no light, even though, I mean, Ramesh sir will be able to tell more about that, whether they were able to integrate all the criminal records of a person to a central repository, where ID can access, raw can access, but I don't think it actually worked.
So I personally feel, Suhas, in principle, it seems to be a very, very good idea. But again, coming back to the point of which is a practical thing, it's nothing to do with politics, state versus the center. The states have also, many of the states, for example, Tamil Nadu and even Maharashtra and many other states have already digitize their land records. So how is this unique identification number will be generated, and what will be the conflict and contradictions versus the central allotment of number to the land plot concerned and the states? That is something that needs to be seen and has to be worked out. Regarding the risk involved, well, Suhas, for any digitization, there would be risks. Any form of digitization, as you have the advantages, you also have the criminals who would be willing to exploit the system, but that is something we have to live with. And because of that, we cannot back off on digitization, because the advantages far outweigh this so-called fear of risk. So in principle, it is a very good, but I don't know in practice how it is going to work out. Multilingual land record is no big deal. With today such tools available for translating languages. But as I said, unique land identification number and one nation, one document software is something that will have to wait and watch and see how the records of the states are merged with the records of the center, and how that unique number is allotted.
See, I'm very encouraged with this again. I'm saying yes, notwithstanding the issues that may come up during implementation. Today, if I have to actually look at and do I have to purchase a property, let's say, today the kind of title verification that happens on the documentation where the properties which have been mortgaged to the housing finance companies or the lenders is something where seamlessly it is available, because it's mandatory for these companies to lodge them on a central repository. And today, I think as a kind of a practicing lawyer, when we look at title searches, I think we gain tremendous trust at one portal by pulling out this data and looking at what are the charges that have been filed by various lenders against a particular asset or a property. That, I think, encourages me to believe that notwithstanding this state level integration, if the integration happens via, let's say, all lenders coming together, because in most of the cases, the properties today are secured by virtue of a mortgage, equitable or non-equitable. And if that data gets integrated, I think it will be a great boost, and it will ease out. Now, whether this actually supports what we have been thinking in terms of contracts management going through a complete digital cycle, is something that probably can be looked at, and every company now needs to probably look at their contracts, especially with respect to the immovable properties, on a very seamless, or in a manner of speaking, that you need to have a mirror of what is here in the digital space, in the NGDR. You should have a mirror with you.
No, so in that sense, yes, I mean, it's very beneficial, right? But these kind of things, it's not like an Aadhaar implementation where we are starting from ground zero.
There is already a lot of data.
Correct. So like what Ramesh was saying, a lot of states have done a digitization. Yes. So some are digitized, some are not digitized, but then how do you identify a piece of land and link it to a contract? So now I think to come to that grassroots level implementation, that is where I think the challenge will start coming. Okay.
Sure. Going ahead very quickly, Jyoti. I think we've seen litigation management, government seems to be suggesting now, and currently this may probably be linked with the tax disputes, where there are covered matters in which appeals get filed with respect to every assessment year. And what government seems to be suggesting is that we need to have a very sound litigation management, and the government needs to be a responsible litigant. From that perspective, they are kind of done away with these appeals in matters which are either covered by the High Court judgments, or matters which are pending adjudication at the High Court and Supreme Court level, where appeals get filed, and these are futile appeals if the matters are covered, and these are appeals which are unnecessary, unwarranted appeals if there's already pendency there in any of the courts, High Courts and Supreme Court. the budget statement seems to suggest this for the tax-related disputes, but the broader issue is when state as a responsible litigant comes in, which was a statement in the national litigation policy that for the first time came out in 2010, 2011. This was revisited in 2015, and I think it's become a state litigation policy. This is coming from there where I think that if the litigation management through, again, I'm saying when you look at what matters are covered, what legal issues are covered, we're talking of a similar system which will be IT-enabled system to look at managing your litigation. And from that perspective, I think this is a good move. Again, I'm saying it's a step in right direction where the government wants to be responsible litigant. And if government wants to be responsible litigant, I think it has to use IT enability to get this sorted out in a correct manner. And that's one. Secondly, I think, please excuse us, it's not IAFC, it's IFSC. The International Arbitration Center, which is being contemplated at IFSC, the Gandhinagar International Gift City, that is a very interesting element again. We've been talking, the lawyers who've been attending to international arbitrations have been talking about why people do not, at a global level, agree to arbitration venue in India. It is because predominantly, I think, the local courts interfere and intervene in the arbitration proceedings. As all of us know, I think there's one portion which is the substantive law. The second portion in the international arbitrations and international commercial disputes is the procedural law. If that procedural law is a law of the venue of arbitration, that gets applied, then knowing the notoriety of the delays in Indian judicial system, international commercial arbitrations to be conducted in India was really looked down upon. If, again, International Arbitration Center for International Commercial Dispute in IFSC becomes a complete isolated kind of a way of working globally adjudicated of disputes without the local courts interfering into this, I think would be a very, very comforting situation for most of the lawyers to say that we don't want to look at SIAC in Singapore, but SIAC in IFSC Gandhinagar Gift City would be our choice of venue, because it not only reduces the costs, but it also looks at your ease of getting your disputes adjudicated faster. So this is again.
But Suhas, judiciary being independent, how can the judiciary be shunned out of application of substantive laws, or told not to, take up a litigation when it comes to application of substantive laws?
No, I'm not on substantive law. Substantive law would be law of England. Your procedural law will be law of venue of arbitration, and that's how the arbitration law would be. Now, here what happens, sir, if you look at section 11 of the Arbitration Act, when it comes to international commercial arbitration, only high courts and Supreme Courts have power, and even Supreme Courts have power. Supreme Court has power, not high courts, has power to look at international commercial arbitration and appointment of arbitrator if there is a dispute on appointment of arbitration. So therefore, there is already a precedent set here that only Supreme Court will look at this issue. Now, if you create International Arbitration Center in IFSC Gift City in such a manner that the matters arising from there will go to a particular commercial court bench in Supreme Court, I think, like section 11, it will give a lot of confidence. Apurva, you want
to... Sorry, just to add to that, I think just on a plain reading of the RBI guidelines and the IFSC guidelines, I think Gift City will be considered as an international seat of arbitration. And as you rightly pointed out, then the substantial part will not be applicable under the Arbitration Act. And I think if we put these two into together, I think then it's a really positive development.
So one can make this happen very clearly. And I think if that happens, I think there will be a lot of confidence which will be built around FDI in India. Because for
will the law of arbitration ride over the substantive law also?
No, sir. I think I mean, this is just my interpretation. The guidelines with respect to IFC guidelines and the IFC centers treat it as a foreign
Please.
entities incorporated in IFC are considered as foreign residents, not as Indian residents. By that virtue, an international arbitration in an IFFC will be considered, the seat of arbitration will be considered as a foreign seat of arbitration. And hence, by virtue of a couple of Supreme Court judgments which have clarified, the substantive law will not be applicable because the seat of arbitration is a foreign seat of arbitration. And then, as Suhas rightly pointed out, and he can correct me if my interpretation is wrong, the Section 11, which directly handles, post matters to the Supreme Court, will come into effect. But particularly, provisions related to interim applications and interim sort of adjudications will then fall out of the window, and that will be a huge benefit, because those are the provisions that are frustrating arbitration sort of proceedings in this country.
Sir, just to kind of bifurcate this, see, substantive law is law that applies to the subject matter of the dispute. It could be Indian law, but arbitral law that would apply would be that of a venue where the arbitration is being conducted. That's the procedural law that would happen. Now, that's the distinction. And what I'm trying to say is that while parties may agree on the substantive law, which is Indian law, but even today, the arbitrations are being conducted in LCIA, in SIAC, and in Singapore, London, and everywhere else. Because the parties fear intervention of courts in the procedural matter of the arbitration, interference of the Indian courts in procedural matters. That is the problem. And if that problem gets solved, I think it will be a tremendous boost to conducting international commercial arbitrations here. Other two sets of law that apply, one is actually law relating to enforcement, which can't be changed. The substantive law may be Indian law, but if I have a decree under Indian law against a party in Ottawa, I'm going to enforce it based on the Canadian law, which will apply to the enforcement laws. So I think there are 4 types of laws that would apply to any international dispute, or any adjudication of dispute for that matter through arbitration. One of them being procedural law of arbitration, which is attached to the venue of arbitration. And if this becomes seamlessly available as a global venue, as Apurva is saying, I think it would be very interesting to look at how businesses kind of adopt it. Because there is an infrastructure there in Gift City today. The ability to conduct these kind of international dispute resolution based on international standards is available there. But having said this, sir, very quickly moving on, I think we're running out of time. It's already 6. Jyoti, you see, there are some kind of defining movements as I see in the budget. One is, of course, the digital currency and digital rupee that everybody is talking about. They've specifically mentioned using of blockchain or other technologies. There is a white paper and there is a lot of kind of discussion that has happened already to say that blockchain may not be the correct technology to look at digital currency. I think that's one area. Secondly, today I think it is important for India to look at fundamentals of asset-related laws before you look into digital currency. Because today the digital assets, I don't know how to possess a digital asset. Today there's an ability to say that we will transfer it, we will transfer dematted shares. But how do I possess unless there is a physical asset at the back end? But I think let's see what happens there. Secondly, I think the updated returns, 2 years time period given to say that Section 139 and 140B being amended, which allows somebody to file updated returns within 2 years upon payment of applicable tax with interest and late return fee payable there, which again is a very good step, I would say, but it needs to be kind of reciprocated by assessees by not misusing this provision. But it's a very good step there, because there will be no fine, there will be no fine, there will be no penalty, there will be no penal interest levied. if these are genuine mistakes where you want to correct your returns. Another kind
See, I think Suhas, fundamentally, this kind of provision that has been made, there is a paradigm shift in the thinking of the government, as I can see it from the colonial era, where everybody and everyone used to be suspected of malafide. Now, this seems to suggest that we trust you, right? If you have made a mistake, you can go and correct it in 2 years. Now, this is a very huge, I mean, as a lawyer, and I know as an enforcement officer, most of these laws are kind of laws which look at you as a suspect, that willy-nilly you would be violating the laws, and therefore the strict provisions of the law and the criminalization of laws, etc. But this kind of that has been brought in, I think, reflects the mindset of the government, that it is willing to trust, it wants to trust its people.
Absolutely, sir. So I think there is a statement of intent about 3 times to say that we want to build a trust, and I think it's a very good sign. Another area which is probably very pivotal is going to be, you see, when in all government procurements, 75% of the bills that are
Yes.
that are through government procurement are running bills, and the kind of intent, and I'm sure this will get implemented correctly. If the payment cycle for these bills become 10-day payment, you see, that's really Amrit Kal coming. You see, in a true sense, because then you don't need to fund your working capital requirements for a large amount of time that we are struggling today. Businesses are struggling today. So to that effect, I think this 10 days payment is an important element in government procurement. And also, I think the bank guarantee is being substituted by surety bonds, because most of the companies have insurance policy, most of the individuals have insurance policy. And if IRDA framework now allows, or there is an inability currently being created, so that if the IRDA framework allows insurance companies to provide sureties bonds instead of bank guarantees, I think we're maturing to a very, very robust government procurement system, where you probably don't have to grease the palms to get your payments released. That seems to be one of the very, very strong, trustworthy, transparent provisions.
We can see.
I can't see, I don't know why.
Hello, we can hear you, we can see you, sir.
No, I can't see the shared screen.
Oh, okay. So we're just coming to an end, sir. I think.
Okay, that's okay.
Jyoti?
Please carry on.
Yes, sir. So this is the last slide that we have.
Yeah, okay. So we're saying, from the point of view of grace, calm, environmental issues, and some of the defining elements from the budget, is what we wanted to today discuss and contribute.
Plus, if I may just make one point, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Just on the digital part, perhaps just one interesting sort of sidelight or interesting part to this budget has been the announcement that digital assets will be taxed at 30% in terms of the transfer of digital assets. Now, there's been some sort of noise around whether this leads to recognition of what are famously called as cryptocurrencies. It's not really a legal recognition, but there are two interesting aspects to this announcement. And the first one, obviously, is the taxation part of it, 30%. I think the finance minister has clarified that currencies other than RBI currency will be treated as assets as well. But in December last year, the preliminary draft of the cryptocurrencies and NFT bills was introduced, and the definition of digital assets is very wide. More from rather than a cryptocurrency, this is a very interesting part to one of the assets that is developing, that those are the NFTs. We will have to look at as to what actually constitutes digital assets and what actually constitutes transfer of digital assets, because this is a booming space right now. And every transfer of a digital asset, if it's going to it's going to impose a 30% tax, then that's going to create quite a bit of an issue. Also, just rather without getting too technical, couple of NFT sort of transactions that we advised on. There's actually just an assignment or a license of an intellectual property belonging to an individual to an agency who develops the NFT. So the NFTs are actually created post transfers. How this will be taxed, this is a very interesting and a developing space that we need to look out for. And of course, people trading in cryptocurrencies now need to sort of ensure. Last year, there were provisions for recognition of incomes by cryptocurrencies in the financial statements and balance sheets. Now they are going to be taxed. So this is again a very interesting sort of perspective from in that respect. The other, just one small quick point that I'll make is a small announcement which was made that there will be an expert committee set up to sort of facilitate funding by venture capitals and private equity investors. While I think the intention here is good, there's already so much regulation in this space, and in fact, people are crying out for less regulation and ease of sort of investment. It'll be interesting what kind of recommendations this committee will be giving. The intention is good, but if he ends up actually making recommendations and measures that will include more compliances, it might create a small issue and a problem there as well. So these are the two interesting from futures perspective developments that also need to be sort of watched out for.
No, thanks for bringing them up, Apurva, very clearly. I think 30% tax in the digital assets. I think if my other income kind of has 30% tax, why not digital asset? That seemed to be the suggestion, and that's why it's that 30% directly. Secondly, I think it's also interesting to understand what legislative changes will come in. You see, because digital asset today, as I'm kind of experiencing, it's completely intangible out there. It's not even intangible property. It needs to have the definition, or it needs to have attributes of a property in the first place, which is capable of being transferred under the transfer of property, without which the meaning to an asset is not there. So I think if I were to look at it, what Japan has done and what UK is doing, UK is actually currently doing it right to say that first let's get recommendations around how do you recognize a digital asset? How do you transfer it? Does it have all the capabilities of a property, so to speak, under transfer of property? So I think it would be very interesting to look at that.
Absolutely. Just one small quick point. World over, as you rightly said, NFTs, for instance, are non-taxable because people are not clear how to treat them. Because NFTs are something that are so there's an image. Let's say a cricketer playing a shot with an image, but that's not an NFT. There is subsequent additions or something that happens to that. So as you rightly said, it's very difficult to classify that as an asset. And that's why people are waiting and watching. It's interesting. We've sort of taken a lead in that respect, but let's see how that moves.
I'm sure it will go through some challenges in terms of this attempt to tax at 30%.
But has digital asset been defined anywhere?
No, not yet.
It's not been defined, so there is some reference to it in the December preliminary bill with respect to cryptocurrencies and NFTs, but it's at a very, very nascent stage and it's not specifically defined in that.
But we are already putting a tax on something that is not defined.
I think the intention was to, if I may say, to tax cryptocurrency earnings, but the word uses digital assets, so that's a very wide term, and hence, as we'll have to see how this plays out.
Sir, cryptocurrency
it's more of a kind of a way of discouraging cryptocurrency and encouraging the digital rupee that would be coming by RBI, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. And there has been a back and forth litigation, including Supreme Court coming down on the misconception of cryptocurrency, if I were to put it that way. Sir, anyway, I think let's move on to addressing questions. Jyoti,
Right. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. I will read them out. The first question is from Mr. Vijay Shivpuri. He is asking whether any minor changes in income tax for salaried persons is NPS 14% applicable for private sector employees.
Sir, one of the jokes that did that kind of went around earlier today was saying the greatest thing that the finance minister has done today is actually not touch the tax in the personal taxation. And I think the joke is not lost onto the people to say that while you will look at some standard deductions being tweaked and changed, but you will make it more complex. So I think there is no, at least we didn't see any major change in personal taxation, except when you talk about some transactions, such as what happens on the long-term capital gains and a surcharge of 15% cap there. But otherwise, there doesn't seem to be any change. The NPS related provision was actually to bring out parity between state government and central government. I don't think that that the NPS, which is the National Pension System related provisions of deduction of central government contribution of 14% and state government contribution now moving from 10 to 14%, is just to make sure that there is a parity. I don't think that applies to the private sector. The private sector law continues as it is today. Jyoti, can we move on to the next question?
Yes. The next question is from Mr. Sri Rangadam. Is there changes in SEZ Act and rules? Are there any changes in the SEZ Act and rules?
Which act?
SEZ.
Special Economic Zone.
Yeah, the kind of intent seems to be saying that this will be replaced by a totally new legislation, which will pave way for multimodal logistic parks being created. Because today what happens is SEZs have been, the SEZ notifications and the SEZ ablement and disablement have happened through notification in other enactments. Although the SEZ law per se has, if you start reading at the law, you will have to look at and read various laws, including the Companies Act has to be read for SEZ purposes differently. Because there are certain provisions in the Companies Act that would attract SEZs. So it's very complex, it's become very complex, and therefore there seems to be a suggestion that there has to be one legislation today to be combined together, which legislation should not, in a sense, allow other laws to amend the provisions of SEZ Act. And I think that is where this legislation required replacement, and government seems to be suggesting in this budget that SEZ Act will be replaced by a totally different legislation. Does that answer the question?
I guess, okay. We have not upgraded him. Yeah, in the chat box, yes, sir. He's mentioned yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Are there any other questions? Anybody wants to raise any questions?
Please raise your hand so that we can upgrade you to the panelist status.
If there are no further questions, then I think thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's just a preliminary view that we are taking with respect to a few of the areas that we believe from a compliance and ethics professional perspective would affect us, our working and our future. We will look at doing a detailed analysis of few of the provisions. We will look at what is the fine print and how does fine print affect various factors or various, in a sense, one of the things that we will kind of look at is whether we need and what are the legislative changes that are foreseen from the budget that will emerge. We will look at that. Sorry, there was another question, Jyoti.
Yeah. Hope shares in DMAT account will not be considered under category of digital assets.
No, sir. DMAT account will not be considered as a digital asset. I think that is where I think this 30% tax, as I alluded earlier, will undergo some of the challenges before the High Court on the constitutional validity of living tax in this manner. But notwithstanding that, I think it's quite clear that DMAT is not a digital asset. Securities, which are underlying securities, is actually the asset. It's not dematerialization or DMAT. Thanks, Omkar. Thank you very much. So with this, I think we'll look forward to a detailed analysis probably on 4th and 6th and 7th February. But till then, Please be safe. Wish you a great evening. And thank you very much, Ramesh sir, Apurva, Parki sir, Dinesh, JD. Thanks a lot, Jyoti. And thanks to Ashni and everybody at the backend team. Sulabh, thank you very much for supporting this requirement at a very, very short notice and putting together in matter of hours a view on what happens to the compliance and ethics professional from this budget. Thank you very much.